All right, so today we're continuing our introduction to the book of Psalms. This is one of, I think this is the fifth introductory lesson. The goal will be within a week or two to actually start going through each of the Psalms sequentially. But I've been taking some time to introduce this book because it's such an incredibly unusual book. And today is going to be an unusual lesson. I'm going to be sharing with you some insights from the ancient world about music, and we'll be listening to some music that you might find interesting or boring or fascinating. It all depends on your perspective, I suppose. But if you look on the front page of your handout, you notice the first black line of text there, Roman numeral 4. We were last week speaking about the music of the Psalms, that every psalm, all 150 of them, each one, is a song. And we don't sing them in the way that ancient Israel did because God did not preserve the music for them. We only have the words that have been preserved. There are a lot of musical remarks in the Psalms. Many of them are about commissioning, like for the choir director, means that someone has written this piece, this poem, and now the leader of music at the tabernacle or the temple is entrusted with composing it or arranging it to be sung by other people. And there are a lot of references to instrumentation, upon the lyre, upon the harp, upon the flute, and performance style, which I'll talk about in a moment. And some of these are pretty easy to understand. We saw last time Psalm 4 and Psalm 5, upon stringed instruments, upon a flute. That's easy. But then some others are kind of debated, like Psalm 8, the heading says, upon the getif, which means maybe, we're not 100% sure, but it might mean upon a harp made in Gath, a Philistine-style harp. Psalm 6 and 12 say an 8-stringed lyre. Now that's an interpretive translation of that little heading. It could mean, it's literally upon an eighth. It could mean a harp that has 8 strings, or it could mean sing an octave lower, because there's 8 notes to the scale, and we'll learn later, even within the ancient music system, there were 8 notes, major notes. Let's look at number 3. You see that one's in the black text. That's where we pick up today. And if you have your Bible open to, now it says Psalm 8, but that's not right. Remember, I have got the wrong number there. A typo, a scribal error. But one of the headings, not Psalm 8, says, upon Shiggaion. Is it 7? Oh, I wasn't too far off. There we go. A Shiggaion of David, which he sang to the Lord concerning Cush, a Benjamite. Upon Shiggaion. So the New American Standard has not translated that word. It's what we call transliterated. That is, it's just spelled out the Hebrew word in English letters. And the word means something like shaking or reeling, like reeling back and forth. So what does that mean in terms to this song? It could be a reference to the emotion that's evoked. That is, you're supposed to sing it with sort of a trembling sort of feeling, with sort of a not full-throated but more meekly. Or it might be a reference to the fact that the song has irregular meter. You know, most of the songs that we sing in our hymnal have regular meter. You know, at the very beginning, if you know how to read music, it'll say 4/4 or 3/4 or 6/8, and every single line follows a certain rhythm. But then we have a few hymns, and Janet will know about this, they don't have any meter code in them. They're just sort of free. And it's frustrating to me as I'm leading singing. I try doing it in 4/4, and that works for the first measure or two, and then it doesn't work for the next measure. So maybe Shiggaion here refers to that this is a poem that's irregular in the way that it is performed. So there's a debate. That's why the New American Standard hasn't translated the word here. It's left it transliterated so you can look it up and make your own studied decision about that. Go to Psalm 9 and look at the heading that's there. And just a reminder that these headings are part of the inspired text. This is in the Hebrew Bible. Verse 1 in Psalm 9 Verse 1 is for the choir director on Muthlaf Ben, a psalm of David. And then in the Hebrew Bible, what we call verse 1 is verse 2. So this is a threefold title. There's a for the choir director. Then there's on Muthlaf Ben, which literally means death of a son. What is that? Is that the name of a tune? Is it a tune that they knew culturally and this poem is set to fit into that tune? Or is this the occasion that prompted the song? Is this written when David's son died? And he wrote this psalm afterwards. We don't know. So this is, again, an example of some of these little headings. They're difficult. We can theorize, but it's hard to be dogmatic about it. Psalm 16 has an unusual heading. This one's repeated a number of times. A miktam of David. A miktam, which might mean a psalm of instruction. Maybe. It's debated, but that's probably the best theory that we have right now. Psalm 22 has a really long word you want to say gesundheit after you read it. Psalm 22, another threefold title. For the choir director, upon Ijeleth Hashahar, a psalm of David. Ijeleth Hashahar means the deer of the dawn. The deer of the dawn. In other words, a doe or a buck prancing around in the morning light. That seems to be the musical style. I mean, when you see deer early in the morning, they have sort of a delightful way that they move around. So it could be a style of playing. It might be the name of a tune that we don't know of anymore. We're not sure. In Psalm 42, at the beginning of Psalm 42, we have another heading. This one shows up a number of times also. For the choir director, a maskil of the sons of Korah. A maskil. It's generally thought that this means either a skillful song or a contemplative song. So skillful means you want to put your best musicians on it. It's hard to play, perhaps. But the word maskil has something to do with wisdom. So it's either you need skill to play the song, or this is a song that will give you skill if you think about it. So it's open for debate, and that's why it's not been translated, but just transliterated. Look at Psalm 45. Here's another one. This was a fourfold heading. For the choir director, according to the Shoshanim, a maskil of the sons of Korah, a song of love. Lots of titles on this one. Shoshanim means lilies. Lilies. That's obviously not an instrument. Could be that sounds to me like a tune of some kind. The Shoshanim. And as you read Psalm 45, you'll find out that this is a royal wedding psalm. It's written by the sons of Korah. We don't know who it's written for, but there's a king is getting married. And part of the psalm is extolling the king and how great he is and God is with them. And the second half of the psalm is to the bride. Forget about your family, forget about the people you came from. You're getting married to the king. And the New Testament finds some allusion, directly or indirectly, to Jesus and his kingship in this psalm. Let's look at Psalm 46. There's another one. For the choir director, a psalm of the sons of Korah, set to Alamoth, a song. Set to Alamoth. Alamoth means young girls. And now that could be a tune name, or it could be the register in which it's written, that it's to be sung in the higher octaves, or by what we would say is soprano voices. more of a higher register song. Well, there are others. These are, I just went through mostly the first book of the Psalms or so and picked out some of the headings. But if you go to the second page now, we're going to delve into a little bit of the world of the ancient Near East. And this could go, and I just realized something I forgot to bring, but that's okay. We've got some interesting pictures here. There are some insights about ancient music from the world of archaeology. For instance, we know a fair amount about ancient instruments, partly from drawings of ancient instruments. And you find these drawings on coins, on monuments like statues and the like, and also in tombs, as people will make, they'll draw paintings inside tombs, especially in Egyptian tombs. And below you are, right below that, are two sketches of inscriptions found in Egyptian tombs. And these were actually very large drawings. They're very small in your handout, but they're so large that you can actually zoom in on the frets at the top of the harp and see how they were strung. And apparently the harp technology, if you will, was pretty much the same across the ancient Near East. Egyptians, Babylonians, Syrians, they all had essentially the same instruments. They might have their own little artistic elements that they would add to it. And partly we know this by, there's actually some documents written in the ancient world about tuning instruments. And you can use the instructions written in Babylon for a harp in Israel. The drawing there on the right, you'll see there's a kind of a concert of sorts. There are 5 women playing instruments. The one on the left has a large harp, and the woman to her right has some sort of like a zither. It's like a guitar-like, as you can see. And the little lady in the middle, I can't tell what she's got. Maybe she's doing pantomiming, I'm not sure. But the one to her right is playing a flute, and then the one on the far right is playing a harp or a lyre or a kinnor. It's a small type harp. By the way, look at the woman on the far right and the woman on the far left. You see at the top of their heads, there's this little arch. I talked about this a couple weeks ago. That is a fat cone. A fat cone, or if that sounds funny, a cone of unction. It's basically a slab of wax or maybe fat infused with spices. It's their head is anointed with oil. They've been not ceremonially anointed, but they've been perfumed up for this performance. So those are the kind of things in Egypt, at least, when you'd sit at banquet, your host would put this slab of wax on your head to perfume you. And as Psalm 23 says, you anoint my head with oil. It's that sort of social image. So we have lots of drawings like that. Now look down the middle. Now I know this is hard to see, and it was hard to see in the original as well. This is an engraving. I think this is on bone. And if I remember right, this is sort of something like an amulet that was worn around the neck. This is, and you can fill in the blank below it, this is a picture of a Canaanite king of Megiddo. The city of Megiddo, which is, of course, we know in the New Testament, Armageddon is the valley of, or the hill of Megiddo. So this is a sketch that was done around 1300 BC. So Israel is already in the land, but they've not totally taken over everything. There's a Canaanite king of Megiddo, and he is seated on the left on his throne. Now, if you take a look at the image on the left, if you strain, you can see there's one person facing to the right, and everyone else is facing to the left. You notice that? So the guy on the left, he's facing to the right. That's the king, and he's seated on his throne. And can you see below his head there are what look like feathers?
Yeah.
You see that? This is on his throne. That is a Canaanite version of a cherub. The cherubim are surrounding his throne. And then facing him are three people with musical instruments. The first one is difficult in the image to make out, but you can see clearly the middle one. That's a kinnor, or a lyre. And then I believe the one to the far right has more of a percussion type instrument. So here's the king of Megiddo. He's being entertained by court musicians. So we can look at these drawings. You compare them with the drawings of the Egyptians and the Babylonians, and say, oh, these harps and lyres and kinnors, they're all very similar. And then look down at the bottom picture. This is quite a bit later. This is some coins that were made for the Jewish Maccabean kingdom. Now, after the time of the Old Testament, there was a period of Jewish self-rule. They threw off they had a war with the remnants of the Greek Empire, and they established a Jewish kingdom. The Maccabee family did this. They really weren't supposed to do what they did. They enthroned themselves. They became kings. They were not descendants of David. So it was not a biblically legitimate kingdom. And they set up the priesthood, and the priests were not the proper descendants to be functioning as high priests either. So biblically, everything was inauthentic about it. But it was a period of glory for Israel, and they struck their own coins. And you can see the images here on both sides of this coin. They have a harp, because they had, remember that one thing that Antiochus Epiphanes had done is he had turned the Temple of Jerusalem into a temple for Zeus and sacrificed pigs on it. They purged the temple and reinstituted temple worship, and so by putting the harp on the coin, that's a way of talking about that the worship of God had been restored. It was partly restored, not properly restored, but and what I forgot is I have one of these coins. I have a student who's a collector of antiquities, and when I give him a good grade, he occasionally gives me a little. just kidding, Jared. If you're listening to this, it's not the way it works. But so we have some images like this, and this is just a small sampling around Egypt and Babylon, and even throughout Canaan. You'll find lots of imagery like this. So let's go to the third page, and we also have the discovery. Archaeologists have made the discovery of actual ancient instruments themselves. And two of the best ones, I've shown you images below. These came from the Babylonian city of Ur. Remember that the Bible tells us that Abraham, before he came into the Promised Land, came from Ur of the Chaldees. There's actually two cities named Ur, and I can't recall which one of the two this is, but as they dug around, they found these, and look at on the left, there is a lyre, a harp, a miniature harp, plated in silver, and they have restrung strings on, they could tell where the frets were, and they restrung it. So the bottom part there, the rectangle, that's the sound box. You know, every stringed instrument has to have a sound box, or it doesn't sound real great. And then if you look over on the right side, there's another lyre that's been highly decorative. You can see the very ornate work that's gone into that. These are royal instruments, not just the common kind you'd find around, in people's homes or have around. I don't know if they dare to bring it around a campfire or not, but this is no harmonica. So with these kind of finds, then it becomes possible to, as letter C tells you, to replicate the ancient instruments. And archaeologists have been able to replicate ancient instruments using the remains they found and instructions in ancient texts. And there are a number of recordings out. You'll find them on YouTube, and I'm going to play one in a little while, of people playing these ancient style instruments. And it gives us a little bit of an ear into what some of the music in the Bible would have sounded like. And look at number 2. This is really fascinating. We have a few examples of ancient music. A few, very few. Very little written music remains from the ancient world. Only a few documents from different eras. The oldest known documents were discovered in the 1950s. They are documents that give instructions on how to tune lyres and harps, and a couple rare tablets with notes, actual musical notes on them. Now, they're not the same. They don't look like our musical notes. If you've learned to play piano or anything else, you would look at these and think, don't know it, but people who know how to read ancient documents say these are not words. And they can compare it to the tuning instructions to see that these are references to notations. It's almost a little bit more like guitar notations as opposed to staff music. So some of these documents they found, for instance, I've mentioned them before, there are tuning texts. These are documents that tell musicians how to tune their harps and lyres. And they found them in different places. They found them in Sumeria. They found them in Babylonia. And the text, for instance, that you see on the right was recovered from Babylon. And it's on a clay tablet. So it's not sheet music. It's on a clay tablet, and it's written in cuneiform, which is basically you take a stylus and you make little indentations, and every syllable has its own symbol. So has one symbol, and has another symbol, and am has another symbol, and tom has another symbol. And so you could never have a keyboard. It would be just huge. It was a terrible way to write. I mean, it was better than Chinese, where every word has its own symbol. But the next development in the alphabet came around the time that Moses began writing the Old Testament, which was the alphabet itself, where every sound has one symbol as opposed to every syllable. But those who, if I ever progress into my Old Testament doctorate, I'll have to learn cuneiform, and I could, right now I can't read this for you, but there are a number of texts like this that tell you how to, and it gives you the name of the scales. And so like in the Psalms, we have these things like upon Shemanith, upon Izer Shahalan. Well, you have that kind of stuff in these tablets. The names of scales, the names of keys, they're all given interesting little code names. And that's why we think maybe lilies or deer of the dawn is the name of a scale or a tune, as opposed to, what I saw this morning when I wrote this song. So we have some tuning texts. So if you make a replica harp, you have to follow the tuning text now to string it right, to get the right sounds. And some of these use Pythagorean theorem to tune the text. It's really fascinating. They found geometry present within the musical system, and then there are, and I had it as a singular. There's actually plural musical texts. In particular, the one song from the ancient world, from Old Testament Israel time, that we have in its entirety was found in the 1950s. The archaeologists were working in an ancient city called Ugarit, which was an Amorite city. It's in modern-day Syria. And actually, they found, I was reading some more this morning, they actually found remnants of 36 songs, where it was not just the words, but actual music on them. And they were all clay tablets, kind of like that one there. But there was only one that was completely in place. And if you flip over to the last page, you'll see a picture of it. This is the oldest remaining complete song. And as you can see, it's written in cuneiform. It was broken in 3 parts. They were able to put it back together. And there's maybe a couple words missing, but it's basically all there. And it includes both text, words, as well as musical notations. And it's a really bizarre way it's written. It starts by going from the left to the right, and then the next line comes down and goes right to left. It's like a zipper. It does this sort of a pattern. And the different languages experimented with that in antiquity, and thankfully they all gave up on it because it gets really confusing after a while, especially if you try to jump into the document at the wrong time. So this is it's a pagan hymn, actually. It's a song to the goddess Nikal. Nikal was a Canaanite goddess of orchards, and this was some song of praise. The difficult part is that they can't fully translate the words. It's written in the Hurrian language. Hurrian is a language that's known, but this is in a peculiar dialect where spellings aren't right, and there's just some words they can't make out. They can make out, upwards of half of it, but much of it they can't. It dates to about the 1400s. That is the days of who? Moses. This is the days of Moses. Isn't this fascinating? So it tells us a little bit of what some Canaanite music was like in Moses' day. And we have one psalm in the book of Psalms by Moses, Psalm 90. There are some other ancient music pieces that have been found, but they're from 1,000 years later. There's one song from Greece that's on a cylinder, and you can turn it around. And it seems like it's on a cylinder so that they could roll it on clay and make copies of it. Parts of the words are still debated as to their meaning, but the tune has been deciphered and performed by different musicologists and musicians. And one of the first recordings was done in the 1970s at UC Berkeley. They performed it and recorded their playing of it. It's called Songs from Silence. And this was the first vinyl record I ever bought. Because this was in the early 2000s, I found it for sale, and no one was playing LP records. So they had a garage of these up in Berkeley, and they were trying to get rid of them. So I have that at my at the seminary office. It is. I'll play a little bit for you in a moment. It is the classic example of boring academic presentation. I remember years ago. I've tried to find this and I can't. But Robin Williams, the famous comedian, did a commercial for the arts about how you should support the arts. And some people, when they think of the arts, think of this. And cuneiform tablets were found. But that's not what the arts are really like. And I used to think, oh, come on, who talks like that? And then I heard this recording. And so what it's 3 or 4 professors from Berkeley had a concert, basically, and it was recorded. And they give their interpretation of what the music would be like. I'm going to play for you parts of a few clips. The first clip is he's talking about the discoveries. The second clip is some examples of the tunes. Like they take the tuning text and they pluck the harp, bum, 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 bum. But it's not quite like that. It's minor keys usually. And then the last one I'll play part of is their recording of the song. Because we don't know how to translate all the words, they don't know what kind of feeling to put into the song, so they sing it emotionless. And so we'll listen to that, and then afterwards I'm going to play for you another performance of it by someone who is a harpist, and they have embellished according to Middle Eastern style, sort of basing on what they've read of the ancient world, what this music would sound like if it wasn't straight. Okay, so let me play for you a few of these. The first is him talking, one of the professors talking.
As a result of recent investigations, 5 cuneiform tablets have come to light, giving us new specific information on the sounds of ancient Near Eastern music. These tablets include one complete song, the Song from Ugarit, which is performed and discussed on the reverse side of this disc, and 4 tablets related to scales and tunings of Babylonian music of the 2nd and 1st millennia BC. 2 of these 4 tablets concern the names of the strings of the lyre and the names of intervals between pairs of strings. The other 2 tablets concern the tuning of the lyre and the names of the 7 tunings. These tunings, and especially the British Museum tablet called the Tuning Text, will be discussed and demonstrated on this side of the disc. For the demonstration, we will use a modern replica of an ancient Sumerian lyre that was excavated at Ur by Sir Leonard Woolley in 1927. The replica was built by Professor Robert Brown of Berkeley.
Okay, and then he goes on to thank Dr. So-and-so of this place and Dr. So-and-so of that place, and you have all those credits. So let me play for you these are samples of the scales. I got ahead of myself. That's the boring song. These are the boring scales, sorry.
Here are the 7 tunings again. Ishartu tuning. Kitmu tuning. Mbubu tuning. P2 tuning. Nidkable tuning.
And there are several more that he plays. Now here's their straight performance of the song without any emotion. It's a two-part harmony that the score has. Did you hear that part little repeated? Because in the musical thing, it goes here to the end of the line, and then the next line repeats as it zigs back over. It repeats that. So whenever there's a repetition, that's where you have the line snakes back. Now there have been a half a dozen different recordings of this, and sometimes the interpretations are quite different. And the last thing I'll play for you, this one is on YouTube. And there's nothing to watch per se, but this is an Israeli musician who has, based on his knowledge of the way that strumming would be done and plucking, he's embellished this score. He has no singing, it's just the music. It's a lot of repeating and some variation, but this, we didn't have any audio recordings there in ancient days. We can't say for certain which one of these two is closer to what this one song was like, but it's a lot closer than anything we might come up with on our own. This gives us a little earful of what music in the ancient world would have sounded like. Now again, it's telling that the Lord did not inspire the music. He inspired the words. And part of the reason for doing that is it gave a freedom for later generations to create new music and new tunes for each generation to enjoy the sacred words. Well, when we come back next time, we'll talk about the Psalms as a whole and how there's sort of a structure of sorts, and then in the new year we'll begin going one by one through the Psalms. Let's have a word of prayer. Our Lord, we thank you for the joy of knowing you. It's a joy that makes us want to sing and to rejoice. We thank you that you've given us instruments, you've given us voices, you've given us the body of Christ to rejoice together. We pray that on this Christmas Eve morning, that our hearts would be full of joy for you, our great God, who has saved us through Jesus Christ. And so receive from us this morning the psalms and hymns and spiritual songs that we'll offer in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.